is the first in a three-part series in the month of July focused on company resiliency. I'm Riley O'Brien, Vice President of Events and Experiences at TAO, and I'm here with Ruthie Ditzler, who's our Marketing and Regional Program Coordinator, who's controlling the back end of our Zoom event today. So throughout the event, we'll continue to allow participants to come into the event and answer any questions you have. A couple of rules of engagement before we get started. All participants have been muted except for our speakers, and we ask that you remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. You can ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to either Ruthie or I. Ruthie's under the special events name. We'll be monitoring the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. And we ask that you all engage via the participant icons on your screen. Yeah, there's yes, no, there's thumbs up, there's claps if you want to give anybody encouragement throughout the event. Please engage with us on social media during this call and throughout the day. We love to share what's happening with TAO and get participant takeaways from all of our events. A huge thank you to our friends at Catalyte for underwriting the series. We really appreciate their sponsorship and partnership and have enjoyed exploring topics of resiliency, and we're looking forward to having more conversations throughout the month of July. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and our moderator for this session, TAO's Chief Community Engagement Officer, Kara Snow. Kara, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Riley, and thank all of y'all for being here today. I'm like, wow, there's a picture of me when I was outside and not just staying in my house. I don't remember what that was like, but maybe we'll get there at some point in the future. So I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce our panelists. I'm super excited about this topic, and I'm going to invite each of them to share a little bit about themselves as I introduce them. So our first panelist is Paige Cox-Lisk. She's Catalyte's Chief Strategy Officer. And Paige, please share a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I'm happy to. Thank you, Kara, and thank you to TAO for hosting this event. Thank you, Tim and Lina, for joining me on the panel. My name is Paige Cox-Lisk. I'm with Catalyte, whom you heard about a little bit earlier. And Catalyte really believes that aptitude is equally distributed in our world, but opportunity is not. So in a nutshell, what we do is open up opportunity for people to move into the technology industry who may come from different backgrounds. They may not have gone to college. They may not have ever worked in a professional job before. We identify them, we train them, we hire them, and we put them to work. And so we're excited here to talk today about resiliency and thinking differently about our talent pipelines and frankly, our talent portfolio.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Paige, and for y'all's support of this event. Our second panelist is Tim Butler with New Relic, Senior Technical Sourcer. So Tim, I invite you to say a few words about what you do and what's going on with y'all over at New Relic.
Thank you, Kara, and welcome to everyone there. Happy to be here. Like it says, I'm a senior technical sourcer at New Relic. I've been there for 2 years now. And basically, a sourcer is a recruiter. And what I do for New Relic is I actively pursue and recruit, source, if you will, technical talent for our product engineering organization. And for us, it's been a great 2 years since I've been there, and we continue to grow. We're a growth company. And lots of new and exciting things are coming down the pipeline. And so we're actively engaged in the pursuit of mostly senior level talent, it seems, but even we're starting to get more into the pursuit of all levels of talent too, because the need exists to fill the whole pipeline for us. So very exciting times and excited to be here.
Tim, thank you. We're super excited to have you here. And you've had quite the hiring experience over the last 2 years because you're at a very rapidly growing company. So we're excited to hear about that. And then I'd also like to invite Lina Batan to speak and introduce herself. She's an HR and diversity leader. Most recently was Cozy's head of people, and she's a board member for PWA as well as a community advisor for Prosper Portland's Tech Town initiatives. So Lina?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. Yep, I am a HR and diversity leader. I began my career in talent acquisition and recruiting, so very similar to Tim's role today. And then I pivoted to HR, but never at that point have I lost my, or lost the importance of recruiting, as it's really the backbone of organizations and talent. And most currently focusing a lot on diversity leadership and bringing more women, minorities, and other undervalued communities and representation to tech companies here in Portland.
Awesome, Lina, thank you. And I'm going to take notes on my questions over here so that we can move this conversation along. And before we start, I'll probably jump in and add some things, because my first job in tech was actually as a recruiter for a software engineering company. So I have a little bit of experience in that realm, and I'm curious to hear how it has all changed. So the premise of this series really started right as we were sheltering in place. And I think we were living under this assumption that we would be doing this for a few weeks. And we have seen that that is not the case. And as we look at what's going on around the country, I think we're seeing that that will continue. The conversation around resiliency for the Tech Association of Oregon and really our community started about a year ago when we were looking at what is it that makes a community resilient. And those were conversations that we had started having. And then when you have this overlay of a health crisis and now an economic crisis, the opportunity to talk about how to be resilient really surfaced as something that companies, employees, and just individuals were interested in talking about. So that kind of leads us to this first question that I'm going to ask. It's a two-part question. I'm going to start, we're going to go in the same order that we just did the introductions, and then we'll change it up because I do think everybody needs to answer this. So the question is, how do you frame or talk about resiliency in your organization? And how do you personally talk about resiliency? So I'm going to start with Paige and then go to Tim and then go to Lina. But I have a feeling that this is going to cause some robust conversations. So how do you frame or talk about resiliency in your organization? And how do you personally talk about it?
So I'll start with our organization. I think it's a great question, right? So pre-pandemic, if you were in the tech industry, and frankly, we're all in the tech industry to some degree, right? It doesn't really matter what your vertical is or what you do. If you're a product company, to remain relevant today, we're all in the tech industry. And to that extent, technology changes on a dime, and our world changes and our politics change. And so to be a company that remains viable and relevant, I think we have to be resilient. And we have to think about that in the way we manage our operations. Prime example, could we swiftly move to a fully remote company? In the way we think about our people, are our people able to pivot and change with the pace of change in our industry and in our world? And then thirdly, I think we have to think about that from a client perspective, right? As we are experts in each of our fields, are we able to provide coaching and advice and recommendations to our clients to allow them to remain resilient through whatever type of work or product or service that we deliver? So that's really how we think about it at Catalyte. It's across all fronts. And people resiliency really to us looks like, I think you heard me say it earlier, diversifying our portfolio. We hire externally just like everybody else does, but we're also big on apprenticeship hiring and internship hiring, throwing away the resume, making sure that we are hunting for the talent that will remain agile and resilient in our organization across the board, and throwing out some of our older ways of thinking about talent. From a personal perspective, my career has really been about resiliency. I've sort of made myself over 2 or 3 major times, first from an opera singer and then to a technologist, and now as a head of people and a strategist. So I think we have to be nimble. We have to be willing to continually learn. And that's kind of how I think about it from a personal perspective.
Awesome, thank you. I did not know the opera singer back. Tim, I don't know how you're going to top that.
I certainly can't top that, but my ears were perked up because while not an opera singer, I can say that my mother led me to pursue being a super in the Portland Opera, which basically is being an extra. And I did that 4 different times for the Portland Opera. So I have been on stage, including for Aida when it was performed here in Portland.
That's
but no, I
lovely.
cannot sing. um, for us at New Relic, being resilient, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're a growth company, a growth business. And in order for a business to continue to grow, you obviously have to have that growth mindset. And so while we don't use the term resilient or resiliency a lot unless we're talking specifically about our software, because we are a product company and we certainly need to make sure that our software is resilient and repeatable and reliable. So we talk about it a lot in those terms, but one of the things that our leaders have certainly talked about is the fact that, hey, we can't just sit back and sort of rest on our laurels, but rather we have to realize that we're going through this sort of digital disruption, if you will, and digital transformation as businesses are moving more and more into digital, where software is the business. And for us, we talk about for the love of software and creating a more perfect software and creating more perfect software experiences for our customers and clients. And so resiliency for us is really all about having that growth mindset and being able to make sure that you are customer focused and centric and finding out what their needs are and understanding that there is a disruption that's taking place and that you need to be, to use Paige's term, nimble. You have to be versatile and able to be resilient to make those changes and to grow the business appropriately. For me personally, or I guess I'll say within TA, a lot of what that means is understanding the future of work and understanding both pre-COVID and certainly after COVID that more and more people are wanting to work remotely. And I was privileged to be part of a project that basically gathered data because diversity is something that's very important to me, and it's something that's important to New Relic in general. And we were trying to ensure that we had a diverse slate of candidates to deliver to hiring managers for every job requisition that we were working on. And one of the things that we talked about was Portland and being such an on-site focused product org and how limiting that was for us, and really presenting data and just leading with data and going and saying, look at these different markets. If you recruit nationally and don't have a requirement of somebody relocating, but just saying, hey, this is a great candidate, they're the best for this position. If they're okay with working remotely, maybe we should be okay with them working remotely as well. And so that's for us part of what we've been doing within TA to be more resilient and understanding the future of work and the mindset of the top talent and what they want to do. And then for me personally, while I haven't remade myself over several times, I certainly have had to be resilient in walking away from a long career in insurance and deciding that I wanted to become a recruiter, and just being able to understand what personal branding is all about and how to position myself to become a player, so to speak, in the Portland market so that I can get a returned call from a tech professional. And so I think that's certainly something that everyone as a professional needs to think about is what can I do to make myself indispensable and to be resilient regardless of what the future looks like so that I can continue to be successful in what I'm doing.
I love that. That's great. And I appreciate that New Relic was exploring that option of the future of work and where people want to work from. So we'll come back to that. Lina, I'm really curious on your perspective here as well, because startup that was acquired, and then with your board service, like you see a bunch of different organizations and kind of what they're looking at from a resiliency perspective. So love your thoughts.
Yeah, so I I would almost say my career is in resilience. I graduated from I graduated with a bachelor's from OSU in 2009 when there was a pretty severe economic downturn, and there were a lot of challenges that I had to overcome to, find a job in my field. And then I had a almost 10-year career in nonprofits. So, working in nonprofits specifically, they run very much like a startup, like a tech company. And that, as Tim and Paige have said, you have to be very nimble and you have to be agile and you have to be able to pivot on a moment's notice to change strategy or operations, or deal with any sort of external factor that might be affecting your business or your ability to recruit good talent. So yeah, I had a very long career in nonprofits, and then I had switched over to tech, and I learned it wasn't much different. It was actually, you had even more challenges. I think, you know, in the nonprofit world, you can sometimes see legislative things coming down the pike and be able to anticipate for challenges that you might run into. I think in the tech field, it's very different, and you know, product decisions and strategic decisions can happen sometimes in a matter of days, and you know, the entire organization has to be ready to meet the new challenges that that sort of poses. And so with Cozy, yeah, you know, I came on at a time when the organization was considering getting off the venture capital roller coaster, and they had decided to you know, go up for sale. And so within 3 months of me being hired, we had basically sold the organization, and we had to deal with a huge set of changes that come with that, not only just from an operational standpoint, but also from really getting our workforce prepared to deal with some of the changes that come with being a new organization, the culture associated with that, a new culture really, and what aspects we want to keep the same for our workforce. And so that was a very interesting time, and I would credit a lot of the resilience of our Cozy staff to being a startup, and to knowing that when you get into an industry or a company like that, that there are changes that come along that you just absolutely have to be ready for, whether you anticipate them or not. And I'd say that's probably one of the biggest hallmarks of being in the tech industry or being in a startup or nonprofit, is being able to deal with that appropriately, and to be resilient and bounce back from, you know, any sort of personal feelings or disruptions that you might see in your work or in your work life. I think personally, resilience to me means everything I've just said professionally, but also, you know, as a person of color, a leader of color in the Portland community, just being able to be resilient to some of the things that so many other people of color experience in the job marketplace, and also just the inclusivity of, you know, being welcomed into certain spaces. And so I think, you know, in most of our careers, we've gone through maybe some sort of reduction in force or work challenges, or, you know, trying to understand what our next career move is, or even making a career shift. And I think resiliency really comes from being able to have a strong sense of self and self-worth, to be able to say, okay, well, I can bounce back from this, and I'm going to make the best of the situation.
Thanks, Lina. I love that answer. We're going to bounce back from this, and we're going to make the best of this situation. So appreciate that. No singing in your background?
You know, my dad was actually a really hardcore like metalhead back in the day, and he played a lot of guitar, and he wanted to I was like, all right, I'm not doing that, I'll play another stringed instrument. So I tried the violin. He would try to get me to sing while he would, like, you know, strum out some sort of tune, but it just never stuck.
Okay, so we'll take 2 out of 3 performing with the opera at some point. I love this. So Tim, I'm going to start this with you, because you talked about high growth company. I have a feeling you're still in that position, just knowing what I know about New Relic. So how do you build sustainable talent pipelines? You touched on it a little, allowing people to work remote, and then not just sustainable, but like really, where are you finding diverse talent?
I would say that, and this is not something that falls within my purview, but you know, essentially having within your talent acquisition organization, you have to have some sort of, or I would say people organization overall. You have to have that structure in place where you're providing tools and resources to the hiring managers to have those conversations, and working with your people team on career development and career growth. And so for us, it's something where those conversations are being had between the manager and the employee on a regular basis, whether it's from weekly or biweekly one-on-ones to the semi-annual review process that you go through, and making it something where it's employee-led, if that makes sense, where you're giving them ownership of their career growth and development, where you're encouraging them to have the conversation and to explain to you what it is that they want to do in their career. And even if that means it's somewhere else, what they want to accomplish here, and if ultimately what they want to accomplish in their career, if that means going somewhere else, being okay with the fact that, well, you might not be able to accomplish that here. Maybe you want to open up your own shop somewhere else, but we can help you establish and develop some good leadership skills that might lead to, opening up your own shop, doing something else somewhere, whatever that may be. But certainly having that structure in place so that the hiring manager understands what is most important to that employee so that they can support them then in that development, and giving them those stretch assignments and different things that are going to help them grow as an employee. And being okay with the fact that maybe they might want to go over to another team or to another org and try something, and not feeling like they're yours for the entirety of their career. And so I think that's something that I've seen at New Relic that really is helpful. And I know that there are many companies have sort of these internal mobility programs. And if you have something like that, you're going to get a much more engaged workforce for sure. And if they're able, as far as the diversity piece, if they're able to see people who look like them in places of leadership, or being able to see how they've progressed in their careers as well, then that's going to be inspiring to them and make them want to stay around longer because they believe it's something that they can also accomplish. As far as acquiring diverse talent, that's always going to be a challenge. But the thing that I told my VP recently, and I'll tell anyone, is it's all about intentionality. You have to show up, and you have to continue to show up, and you just have to be real intentional about it and not feel that you're doing something well just because you wrote a check to sponsor something, or maybe you went and had a booth at 2 events in a 12-month calendar. It's all about that consistency with whatever group it is that you're pursuing, and showing them that you truly do care, but then also being able to have proof of your inclusive work environment as well too, so that they can see themselves as working there and being able to continue in their career growth and development.
I like that. It's very holistic. And I like to focus on career growth and development, because it's not just about getting somebody in the door. It's also about that retention piece. And I think that's really interesting. That's the way y'all are approaching it. So thank you.
It has to be, otherwise the back door is going to be wide open, and you're never going to accomplish your complete goals of having a completely diverse workforce. So it's as much about the front door as it is protecting your back door and giving them a work environment that they enjoy being part of.
It's very cool. I'm going to ask the same thing of Paige, but with a little bit of a different twist, because I know that part of what y'all do at Catalyte is, use AI to find folks that may not be traditionally the talent that you would put into a tech role. And so, how are you building that sustainable pipeline? And since you are truly looking for more non-traditional candidates, I think a lot, like we've all talked about, people being able to work remotely and have access to devices and internet. And, there's a whole population of folks that I'm sure could be fantastic software engineers that that we are unaware of because of their lack of ability to connect. And so there's your question. How do you build that new sustainable pipeline? And how do you do it when it's not just the folks that are graduating from CS or even from code schools that you may not know about that are out there?
It's a great question. And I agree with everything that Tim just said, right? It's about getting them in the door. It's about ensuring that they're in an environment that is inclusive and one that they just want to work in, with people they want to work with. And when I say they, it's every individual, right? So Catalyte really thinks about diversity a little bit differently. We think diversity weaves a much stronger fabric. Speaking of resiliency, But we look at diversity of thought, of experience, of socioeconomic background, of education, of race, of gender, of religious affiliation. So we broaden our thinking around diversity to include all types of differences. And this helps us reach out to a broader pipeline. But I don't think it's enough just to have what we're finding, the intentionality. It's got to be there, but there's got to be some action behind that as well. And I know Tim knows this and does this as well. But in order to have a more diverse talent pool, we have to figure out new and creative ways to meet the talent where they sit. LinkedIn is not going to reach everybody. Craigslist does not reach everybody. We actually do post jobs on Craigslist, but that meets a small population. We're finding that we need to get out into the community and leverage some of our community organizations and some of our state and local government organizations to be able to reach people that truly come from diverse situations, whatever that diversity may be. So it's all about marketing, getting the word out that, hey, we're here as a company and here's what we do, especially for Catlight, but it's finding people where they sit so that they're comfortable. And that's the first touch point. And then it's bringing people in the door and ensuring, like Tim said, that it's a place they want to work, that it's a place they see themselves working and growing, no matter what their personal situation is, and that we're modeling that behavior at all levels of the company, right? It's easy to paint cool words on a cool colored wall and say, hey, we have a really cool culture. But when it comes down to it, if you have all white walls and no cool words, but you're modeling the behavior, that's really what makes people want to dig in, get behind the mission, start to grow their own careers, and then frankly, start to reach out into their own networks. And that's truly where we find meaningful diversity, is when our own employees and our own clients are reaching out to their own networks to say, hey, are you aware of this company? They do things a little bit differently. They've got, maybe better diversity stats than most tech firms, but all of the analytics aside, it's a place I'd love to work and I want you to work here too. That's really how we think about that and how we find our pipeline. And if we do an external hire, somebody that doesn't come in through our program, it's really the same thing. We really start to press and poke around on cultural fit, around mentoring and feedback and sharing information and not holding that close to the vest, and making sure that they want to work in an organization that truly thinks diversity is our strength and our resilience, and that they're willing to model behaviors as such.
Awesome, thank you. So I have a question in the chat that I actually really like. Lina, I was about to ask you about DE&I playing a role in building a resilient talent pipeline, but we're going to come back to that. So Kim Black has put a note in here that says she works for a national public charter school network with 90% Black and Latinx student population that may not have access to the same networks and knowledge as others. And since we just touched on networks, how can students increase their visibility in the talent pipeline, and how can companies better engage with these students? And Lina, I may still start with you just because of your work with PWA, but then it's open to whoever else would like to answer.
Yeah, actually, this is in line with exactly what the PWA does. So the PWA is the Portland Workforce Alliance, and they are a nonprofit organization here in Portland that's committed to serving, oh gosh, almost 12,000 Portland Public School students, largely from high schools that sit at the federal poverty line or under, coming from these undervalued communities. And the entire goal of the organization is to help connect these students with employers and to educate them on non-traditional pathways that they could get into and explore careers that, sometimes don't always lead to a four-year degree, but can. But we find that oftentimes students have no idea that certain careers are available or even an opportunity for them simply because they don't know they exist. And so we're hoping to close that gap. And so a lot of the work that we do is exactly that. We are engaging students to, be able to come to events, to online workshops. We do these events and these workshops to help connect these students to employers locally, not only to open and broaden their perspectives on what career pathways are available, but also so they can have a channel into these recruiters and these organizations and to familiarize themselves with who business leaders are in the city. And we find that important just because, especially here in Portland, we know that there is a huge lack of diversity in a lot of organizations across the board, and especially in leadership. And so we really want to focus on that. I'd say, and to Kim, you're more than welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect you with our PWA Executive Director, Susan Nielsen, so you can get even more information about what they're doing. But we actually have career days. We partner with organizations, and let's say it can be in tech. We get together 2 organizations and say, okay, we will pull high school students from one specific high school for 2 hours. One morning, they'll go to one organization, talk with engineers, product managers, customer support folks, understand what they do in a tech capacity, and then maybe they'll switch over to another organization like construction in the afternoon and figure out what do they need to do, or what do they need to do to become a construction engineer or to get into construction? What are the first steps, first paths? And a lot of times these students are realizing that these professionals have taken non-traditional pathways into the careers that they are now. So I'd say really leverage your business community and your business leaders and create those partnerships so you can do those things. You can create those learning opportunities for students. I could go on forever about this because there's just so many ways that we can tap into the high school talent pool. And that's when we're really talking about the supply side of talent and the future of work, we really have to look there. Because if you invest in the supply side and the high school students and the college students, that's what your future workforce and your talent pool is going to be. And so if you can get in early and have those crucial conversations, even put your brand in front of their eyes and let them know that there are certain career pathways available to them, you're creating a lifelong relationship. And who knows, you can even potentially be a mentor for them. So that's just one of many ways that you can really leverage those business relationships and then create those engagement channels for students.
I second that. Everything Lina said, but the partnerships are key, right? So at Catlight in the cities we're in, we create partnerships with charter schools, with digital high schools, with tech schools, with local school governments, even in the Baltimore area, right? To see if we can roll our personal screen out to high school students, sometimes as young as their sophomore year, and then have them take it again their junior and their senior year, which we typically don't do, but it helps schools sort of assess where their own talent lies, maybe that sort of lean towards tech, but it also allows schools to start to change their curriculum to help better support the students in their organization that might want to go into the tech field, and to help them get the strong foundation in the areas that they need of problem solving and puzzle solving and linear thinking. So absolutely agree with everything Lina said.
Awesome. Tim, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree with both Lina and Paige on this, especially what Lina was outlining there with the work she's doing. It's really all about those partnerships, and I've only been part of one of these, but we had a group from iUrban team that came to New Relic. I think it was sometime last year. And I know that we've also had a Hack the Hood event, which is a group down in Oakland that we've partnered with as well. And I think anytime you've got this group of kids, if they can figure out who these different businesses and companies are, there's going to be inside of those businesses, whether it's a corporate social responsibility group or a ERG, an employee resource group, that they can somehow, some way partner with and be able to find those opportunities where they can go and learn about the different opportunities within tech. And so for us, we have a corporate social responsibility team, but we also have employee resource groups too. And I think it's incumbent upon not only those leaders that are working with the students, but also the businesses also to figure out what they can do to sort of, to Lina's point, reach back and find out who those students are and understand that that is the future workforce for us.
I appreciate that so much. And there's another question in the chat that I really like. And so I'm going to not do my own questions. I'm going to do these because this is a challenge when it comes to the diversity and inclusion conversation. So Celeste Peterson asked that we're using, the words were used, cultural fit. And what does that mean to you? And how do you ensure focusing on it doesn't lead to a lack of diversity? And I know this is a conversation that I have heard and been a part of, because when you look for that fit, you're probably just looking within your same comfort zone as before. And so the phrase cultural add was put in here, which I really like. And so I'm going to ask, and it's open. I don't really know that I want to call on anyone, but what does that mean, that cultural fit, and how do you ensure it doesn't stand in the way of a diverse and inclusive workforce? Tim's unmuted.
Yeah.
I can jump in. Oh, go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that culture add was something that I did not hear until I got to New Relic, and as I was in the process of coming over to New Relic. And prior to that, I'd heard a lot of culture fit or cultural fit, and I hated the term. I hated it because as a person of color, I knew what that meant. I knew that it was coded language, whether it's ageism or based off of gender or ethnicity, ethnic, cultural background. So it's something that I did not like hearing. And when I heard it, culture add used, going through my hiring process at New Relic, it perked my ears up. And it was something that really appealed to me. And once I learned more about it and realized that it was more about what are you bringing to the table? Hey, we're interested in your hard skills and the soft skills, but we're also interested in something else that maybe you're going to bring to the table that's going to, as I like to call it, uplift the team that you're going to be potentially part of. And so culture add for me is really the way to go. It's a better term until maybe another better term comes along. It's really about bringing in those new voices, those new perspectives, those new backgrounds to the table, because you're getting them all together, and hopefully that's going to help make a stronger and more productive team.
I think that's right. I think I would use the word "and" here, right? I love the term cultural add. And so as we talked earlier about onboarding and bringing people in and making sure that we've got a strong retention practice. And the way we do that is we get to know people. They need to know the company, and we need to get to know them as they come in, right? Directly to Tim's point, what are you bringing that will add value here? We see that so much across Catalyte. We have people who are developers now, but used to be baristas, or used to be high school science teachers, or used to own construction companies, or used to be a PhD, or still have their PhD in biomed. And think about all of the things that they're bringing to the table that are different than if we hired a bunch of Stanford developers, right? So I think that cultural add is key. I do think fit plays a role here though, and let me tell you why. I think you have to understand the company that you're moving into, right? At Catalyte, I already talked about, we're big on mentorship. We're big on feedback, 360 feedback, on sharing and helping and supporting others. And if you are a person that doesn't really jive on that, or doesn't really want to do that, if you see that as a bother rather than an ad, you're probably not going to be successful at Catalyte, or at least you're not going to enjoy your success at Catalyte, because that really is expected. So as you're bringing yourself and all that you've unmasked in skill and experience to the company, I do think we all should be aware of the company that we're going into. So whether or not we are interviewing with a company, we're interviewing them just like they're interviewing us. And so when we have new employees come in, they need to be aware of what the culture at large or writ large is, and we need to be aware of how they're going to add value to that culture. So I think this is a great conversation. Thank you, Celeste, for posing the question.
Lina, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the term culture fit is a bit problematic. I think that just innately means, it's just very it just depends on what your organizational culture is. If your organizational culture means that you don't have very diverse leadership, whether that be gender or representation or otherwise, the culture fit to you is going to be that you're going to keep status quo. I think values fit is also a better term. And I think, Paige, that's probably what you were trying to touch on is, what are the values of the organization? Do you value collaboration? Do you value continuous learning and professional development? And so, at Cozy, we had our 5 tenets of values, and we would always say, you will succeed here if you are, respectful of others, if you're open to learning, if you iterate often. It's values that really, I think, make or break a candidate's ability to thrive in an organization. I think culture is always very fluid. With every new hire that you bring into an organization, your culture will shift. And so it's so very hard to have this idea that there is like a exclusive culture in any sort of organization, because it's always so fluid. I mean, we think about, for example, with Cozy or with any other organization that becomes acquired, goes through sale or goes through a merger, or even changes CEOs, your culture is going to drastically differ with new figureheads and with new leadership, and even senior leadership to entry-level hires. I think team culture and organizational culture is just very fluid. So I think values fit. I think those are tend to be pillars of organizations that stay pretty standard across teams and across management levels. And so, I personally always hope that my talent pool, their values align with the values of my company, because then I'll know that they have the ability to thrive.
That's great. Thank you all for all those answers. Really like the values fit, really like the culture add. And Tim, I really appreciate what you said, because I too spent my career like with all technologists, and I was often the only woman, and I'm sure that I was not probably what was considered the culture fit along the way. And you feel that. I mean, I think you feel that when you're not who would have been historically hired. So those are all really great answers. Okay, so I'm going to see if there's no other questions in the chat. So I'm going to go back to one of ours. And I think this is the appropriate time to ask this question. So we talked about how to build a new sustainable pipeline. And I think we're now touching on both systemic, internal, and external challenges. So like, what are the barriers that you all see that you have to overcome to build a sustainable pipeline? And again, I'm not going to call on anyone. I'm going to see who unmutes first, but Lina's got it. It's like Jeopardy.
So yeah, back to creating sustainable and resilient pipelines, as we have so many things going on kind of culturally here in the country. And, as we look to diversifying our pipeline, one of the things that I'm noticing right now is that there needs to be just a mass leverage of your social and marketing channels. Any candidate right now, so we have a lot of positives and a lot of negatives happening right now in the market. And one of the great positives is that there is a huge pool of talent. The negative is that they are there because, of economic conditions that have probably reduced their positions. And so to tap into that, everybody's at home, everybody's trying to keep up with what's happening economically and politically, and with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that candidates are really hyper-focused on the messaging and the stance organizations are taking and where they stand on, any of these topics. Specifically, Black Lives Matter, I think, is at the forefront right now. And so as companies, I have several peers that are looking for work right now. And one of the first things they do is go onto their Twitter, go onto their website, see if their statement has been made. Where do they stand on any of these topics? And, I think as a lot of people are saying right now, silence is complicity, especially from an organizational standpoint, because your workforce should represent the demographic makeup of this country, which is a huge melting pot. And they're looking for that stance. They're looking for that statement. They're looking for that commitment. And I think now more than ever, they're looking for that because they're looking for that value fit. If their personal values lean one way or another, they want to work for an organization that also represents that. And I think, you know, on the COVID front, being able to share widely on your recruitment channels what you're doing in the midst of COVID, how you're changing your recruiting process. And I've seen this as pop-ups on several hiring and tracking platforms, but a little pop-up will show up. So, you know, due to COVID, we are holding all interviews online, or we'll be conducting remote interviewing process, but also just letting the community know what you're doing to support your employees right now during COVID as well. So yes, remote work is great. You know, are you sending hand sanitizer to people's homes? Are you allowing them potentially more time off right now because they might have childcare challenges that they need to address? Those things are important for your brand, but they're also important for your workforce, because we just don't quite know when this is going to end. And if you support your employees, then that's certainly somewhere that's, you know, folks are going to want to work. And so I think it's just important that if you're already doing the work, to make sure that you share that with your networks, because candidates will see that.
Yeah, I think Lina's spot on there, right? And and as we think about our own company's values and culture, what Catalyte, you know, from a hurdle perspective, and this came in long before the pandemic, we often find ourselves educating employers, right? Because we bring talent to the table who comes from a different background. And one thing we know in this world is that college is fantastic, although not attainable and not for everyone. And employers have to start thinking differently. So we spend a lot of time educating partners, employers, peer companies of ours around the need for diversification, right? You can't put all your eggs in one basket. And if the colleges, which we've historically leaned on, can't produce the number of tech professionals that we need, we've already had a million gap before COVID even started, right? Then the employers have to start taking ownership of training, retraining, hiring out of different pipelines, using apprenticeships as ways of getting people in. And this has only been magnified through the pandemic and through Black Lives Matter, that employers, for every reason that Lina just said, have to think differently about what they're doing, right? It's not just about their own employees, it's how they're putting themselves out into the market. It's how they're working with vendors like Catalyte or like New Relic. And are those relationships ones that are sustainable as the world begins to change, and the true change that we need to have around systemic racism really starts to take hold, and that companies have to think differently. And so while Catalyte has spent a lot of time educating or helping to educate companies in ways to do things differently, it's really come to the forefront around diversity, around pipeline, around making sure you have some from college, some from apprentice, some that you're retraining within your own organization. If your call centers are reducing in size, think about the talent that you've got in that call center. They understand your business, they're close to your client. Reskilling, retraining that population to take your tech jobs just makes a more resilient foundation and a resilient talent pool, because you're keeping that knowledge that those people have while moving them into jobs of the future. So I think all of this comes to bear on each one of us, with our own employees, with our vendors, with our clients, and with ourselves. We have to make sure that we are thinking about the future differently as individuals, so that we can come together as a collective to ensure that we are making the change in this country and this world that needs to be made.
Awesome, thank you. Tim, do you want to add anything about the barriers that you're seeing as you try to build this sustainable pipeline?
Yeah, I think, you know, as what Paige just referenced, as far as, I sort of look at it in these terms. I call it an arms race, and I mentioned it before. Sometimes companies can get caught up chasing sort of the senior level talent or a specific profile of talent and being blind to the fact that, hey, there are these great candidates that are sitting over here that are bringing a lot to the table. Paige listed off the different backgrounds, and that's why I love boot camp grads, because I always implore them and encourage them to not forget about or dismiss their prior experience, because they're bringing a lot to the table. It's not to knock a CS grad, but it's just the fact that they have been working for 5, 6, 10 years or more in a certain area, and they're bringing a lot to the table in addition to these newly learned technical skills. And so it's incumbent upon companies to be more creative and realize that you can't just keep chasing the same group of people around, because you're going to miss out on a wide swath of the candidate pool that exists, not only in your own market, but even nationally, as of course we become more globally focused when it comes to how we're working, with everybody working remotely now, and who knows how far into the future. So that's the thing that I think about as a big challenge, is being able to find someone that has that competency to be whatever it is that you're looking for. And if they're not there in 6 months, maybe they can be there in 3 years, 5 years, and become one of your rock star, term I hate, or really great employees. So it's one of those things of just taking those blinders off and being more creative about how you're going about filling your talent pipeline, so that you can have a truly robust pipeline of candidates to fill your open positions that are going to be coming open down the line.
I like that. I've seen a lot recently around competency training versus, year-long programs or multi-year long programs. So we've got about 6.5 minutes left. So I'll open it up for questions again, but I was going to ask each of you, this was really a 3-part question, and I'm not really sure which one what I want to play on, but it's really like, how does building a resilient talent pipeline help your business, your community, and how does that help combat some of the inequality in the world? And so I'd love all 3 of y'all's final thoughts on that. But how does your resilient talent pipeline help business, community, and inequality? And I'm going to throw into the chat for anybody that's interested. It's a McKinsey study on the future of work in Black America. And I'm throwing it in there because, to Tim's point, where are you looking for your talent? And if you look at some of our fastest growing markets, there is an underrepresentation of Black Americans. And so how do you get folks into those high paying jobs? And is the answer remote? So y'all might want to take a look at that. But we did have one more question in here. Has anyone had experience with training your hiring managers about training up or growing your own versus chasing the same small group of skilled workers around? Oh, that is a good question, particularly in the Portland market.
Yeah, I can touch on that briefly. So at Cozy, we had come up with a skills matrix, and so we had marketing, customer success, customer support, engineering, product, operations. And we had identified the core competencies that somebody that we would hire externally would need to have to come into a position at any level in one of those guilds, in one of those professions. And we then decided, okay, if you're coming in as a specialist, or if you're coming in as a manager or a director, you would need to have these specific skills. And so it was tiered up, so employees could understand the skills that they would need to develop or work on, or some of the successes that they would need to be able to have under their belt to be able to move up to the next level. And this was a widely accessible document to the organization. And so if somebody came in and they entered tech as a support specialist and they wanted to be an engineer, they would know exactly the skills that they would need and the hours that they would need to invest in shadowing or working with an engineer in our organization to become one. And it was a really helpful tool, because at Cozy, we did do the grow your own sort of method. And we had, in the 2 years in that position, we probably had, oh gosh, I don't know, several, let's say several folks that would come in to support, they'd put in their year, understand the product, understand the business, understand what departments and interests that they had, and then be able to move into engineering. So we had 2 folks that had gone on to come in to support, go into engineering. We had somebody that go into customer success, somebody that go into marketing, somebody go into product management. So they came in as a support specialist. Within a year, they were a product manager. That's just not the opportunity somebody like that would be able to get out in the market. It's very hard to do that. So be able to create that opportunity for an employee and give those some skills, and then, you know, whether to stay with Cozy or not, that's really up to them. But we feel great giving them a launch pad to start their career in product management. And that's been it was widely successful for us, because now we also have an employee that's cross-trained. And that's able to bring that perspective back to our customer support team, and then mentor them and to say, hey, yeah, if you want to come into product management, here's my story, this is what you need to do. But being transparent, being open, creating that matrix and giving it to the organization. A lot of time employees don't feel comfortable having that conversation with their current manager, because they fear that they don't have that kind of stay put mentality. And the hiring manager might be fearful that they are going to be a flight risk and leave their department after training them up for, you know, several months. But we made it part of our organizational culture to leave that open, to be transparent, and to support employees moving along in their career within Cozy. And so it was wildly successful for us.
I love that. Paige, did you want to add something?
You know, I was just going to say rotational programs like that are fantastic, tried, true, and every company should be utilizing that. At Catlight, we've taken it a step farther as well, and we've created a playbook for our clients so that as they're reskilling, retraining their own employees, they understand that it takes more than just giving somebody the initial skill, right? There needs to be some wraparound services. The organization needs to think a little bit differently about how they bring that employee in and allow that employee to start to grow their own career. And so I think, especially if you're in a services business, you have to take care of home, but often you have to help bring employees and rather clients along. And so I would just encourage people to sort of think bi-directionally about that as they're moving forward with their resiliency plans.
And Tim, you touched on this a little bit when you talked about New Relic in general, like the front door, making sure the hiring manager knows what people want to do so that you're protecting that back door. But any final thoughts as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I would just say that we do have one apprentice program, and it's built for software engineers, though. As far as the whole org goes, we have someone within talent acquisition that I believe was brought on to get us into a more formalized approach to, as it's termed, to growing your own and looking at talent mapping and talent management within the internal workforce. So my hope is that we will get to a point where we do have a formalized process beyond just our connect conversations that we have on a regular basis, as far as, so what do you want to do? You know, where do you want to go? And creating something a little bit more formalized so that we can take those individuals from whatever that entry point is to maybe something different than what they thought about when they first came in the door with us.
Thank you. And thank you all, Lina, Tim, Paige, for sharing your thoughts, for sharing what y'all are doing in your organizations to build resilient talent pipelines, for discussing some of the barriers and challenges, and for giving folks some tips and tricks. It's cool to see where organizations are and where they would like to continue to go as they become more resilient. And I would also like to thank Catalyte one more time for helping us put this program on. And with that, it is high noon on the West Coast, and we really appreciate everyone joining us today. So round of participant applause for our fabulous guests, and we look forward to seeing all of you online in the future, and I hope at some point in person. But until then, stay well.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.